Now, we often talk on this channel about the rise of what are called civilization states, right? If you do not understand this whole notion of the civilization state, you are not going to understand what Trump is doing here. You're not going to understand what he's doing in Iran. You're not going to understand what he's doing in Hormuz. You're not going to understand what he's doing in the Strait of Malacca that links the Indian Ocean with the South China Sea. You're not going to understand what he's doing with Venezuela or Cuba or Panama. You're not going to understand what he's doing with Greenland or the Board of Peace or what he's doing with NATO. I mean, you're not going to understand Artemis 2 and Space Force and AI. The civilization state, or what I call the civcosm, this rising civilizational cosmocracy, provides the conceptual center that literally integrates everything Trump is doing here. So let's start by getting the conceptual center here, because once you've got that, everything Trump is doing locks into place. First and foremost, a civilization state is not a nation state. You got to get that, especially if you're like a Tom Massey libertarian, God have mercy on you. But you got to get that. A civilization state is not a nation state. The nation state is a relatively recent invention, roughly 200 years old, built on the idea that political loyalty is primarily territorial. So you got a flag, you got a border, you got a government, you got a people who share a language and usually an ethnicity. That was the organizing principle of the modern world, right? A civilization state is very different than that. A civilization state is much older and it's much larger. It organizes political life around a shared civilizational identity, a shared cultural identity that extends beyond borders. It's a common sacred order. It's a common historical memory, a common understanding of who we are as a people and what we are for, what we mean in this cosmos. So think, for example, of China. China is not a country among countries. China is historically a civilization. 5,000 years of continuous cultural and philosophical tradition, and it's now reasserting itself as a geopolitical actor that has sovereignty over its own geographic sphere. China is, in many ways, the first real civilizational state to emerge. Or think of Russia. Russia does not think of itself as a post-Soviet rump state. It sees itself, once again, as Holy Rus, the third Rome, right? The first Rome fell, then Constantinople fell, and so the center of Christianity moved to Moscow. That's the third Rome ideology, as it were. It has its own orthodox civilizational logic that predates communism. And again, you could say, well, Putin just says that because, you could be very cynical about it and say, Putin just says that to cloak his kleptocracy and everything like that. Fine, I'll see your hand and raise you 10. He says that, so why does it work? Why is it so popular? Why does he appeal? Why does China appeal to renewed Confucianism? Well, it's because people don't believe in communism anymore, but they do believe in their civilization. Right. So the civilizationalist rhetoric coming from Xi, coming from Putin, the very popularity of it proves that civilization states are now front and center in the sort of the cognitive imagination of these populations. I think of Iran. Iran was not a nation state playing by what's known as Westphalian rules, going back to the treaties of Westphalia back in the 1640s. Iran was the Shiite civilizational project that bound together all other Shiite forces in the region, Hezbollah, the Houthis, the revolutionary forces in Iraq. Think of India, too, as a civilizational state. It's the classical term is Bharat. It has its own civilizational Hindu grammar, stretching back thousands of years to the Vedic era, now reemerging as a self-conscious great power through the rise of the Hindu nationalist vision of the BJP, the Bharatiya Janata Party, and Prime Minister Modi. And this is what the BRICS alliance is all about, right? That economic alliance known as BRICS. It's a networked multipolarity that economically joins forces with the great civilization states of China, Russia, and India, along with Brazil and South Africa. They don't care about your politics. They don't care if you're a liberal democracy. They don't care if you're an authoritarian, kleptocracy. They don't care. They don't care. What they care about is maintaining the sovereignty of their own nations and then entering into an economic alliance, a multi-civilizational economic bloc that protects the integrity and the sovereignty of their respective civilizational spheres. And now think of America. Think of America under Trump. It's no longer a liberal democratic nation state. It is the Western civilization state, a civilization built on a Christian Protestant sacred order, classical learning in Jerusalem, Athens, and Rome, constitutional liberty, technological mastery, an emerging sense that Western civilization itself is worth defending as a civilization, not merely as a policy preference. This is the vision of America originally coined by John Winthrop, quoting the scriptures, naming America as the shining city on a hill. Our forefathers crossed over the Atlantic, and they saw that as the Hebrews crossing the Red Sea to inherit this new promised land and to be a beacon of hope and freedom for the world. That's the theological, civilizational vision that is part of the DNA of America. That's what we're singing when we're saying, God bless America. This is what I mean by the civcosm, the civilizational cosmocracy. It's a new world order that's not organized around administrative managerial institutions like the UN or the IMF or the WTO, but around civilizations, ancient civilizations, competing and cooperating across three interlocking arenas. The first is theopolitics, the contest between civilizational sacred orders for moral authority and cultural legitimacy. We're seeing this explicitly in this clash between the Abraham Accords nations and the messianic multipolarity of the Islamic Republic of Iran. The second arena is technopolitics, the contest between civilizationally distinct technological ecosystems for economic and military supremacy. And the third arena is astropolitics. So that's the extension of this civilizational competition beyond geopolitics into astropolitics, beyond this atmosphere into orbit, to the moon, to the stars, literally. Whoever wins space writes the rules for the next epoch of human civilization. We're talking for literally the next 1,000 years. And once you see the world through that civcosm framework, everything Trump is doing, and I mean everything, snaps into focus. It's not chaos. It's not impulsiveness. It is a coherent, civilizational, grand strategy. And nowhere is that clearer than what is happening right now in Iran and the Persian Gulf. So let's start with what the legacy media just gets totally wrong about all of this, right? If you've been listening to the press, you'll note that, and the Democrats as well, they operate in a 24-hour rage cycle. And nowhere has that been more disorienting than in their coverage of the Iran war. So, for example, after Trump tweeted on Easter that he was going to end the civilization of Iran, right? You remember that? Meaning, of course, the radical Shia jihadist theocracy, not the Iranian people or the ancient Persian heritage. The Democrats and the media absolutely flipped out. They accused him of being Hitler. They said he was deranged. They said you needed to invoke the 25th and remove him from office. And then literally 24 hours later, when he announced the ceasefire and high-level negotiations with Iran, those very same voices called him a coward. They said he buckled. They said Iran won, that Trump was the new Neville Chamberlain, a Jimmy Carter sellout. Taco, right? Trump always chickens out. Now, of course, you can't hold both positions at once. So what this reveals is that these voices in the legacy media, they're not analyzing the war empirically or objectively. They're analyzing it politically. They've reached the point. I mean, they already have the headline written before anything happens. And they've reached the point where anything that goes badly for the United States would, in their estimation, be a net positive because it's going to hurt Trump. And keep in mind, they're doing this while tens of thousands of American soldiers are in the theater risking their lives to prevent Iran from acquiring nuclear-tipped ballistic missiles that within 2 or 3 years could reach not just Western Europe, but the continental United States, with North Korean, Chinese, and Russian assistance on the back end. And they're doing it while there is at least some communication structure left for the Iranian people who are waiting for the green light to rise up. They're hearing this BS from the legacy media, and it's demoralizing them. Now, in civcosm terms, what these legacy media critics just simply can't see because of their TDS is that the Islamic Republic of Iran was simply, it was never a normal nation state pursuing normal nation state interests. It was a theopolitical civilization project, the Shia jihadist vanguard of a global Islamic revolution with the explicit theological mandate to destroy the Zionist entity, humiliate the great Satan, and prepare the ground for the return of the hidden imam. So this is not a negotiating position. This is a civilizational mission, and it's irreconcilable with an American-led civilizational order with America as the shining city on a hill, a beacon of hope and freedom for all the world, and the architecture, the security and peace and prosperity architecture that it has helped broker between Israel and the Sunni Gulf Arab countries in the Middle East. The two cannot coexist. So this is why Trump is not treating this as a diplomatic dispute with a difficult country like Obama and Biden did, sending them, boatloads, literally airplane loads of cash. Trump is treating this as a civilizational confrontation, a clash of civilization, and he's right. So that's the theopolitical civilizational dimension that's operative here. And people need to understand that. There is no negotiating with Iran. The theopolitical dimension here completely negates that. Iran sees itself as having a divine mission to destroy the great Satan. There is no negotiating with that. You may be able to work out a deal here or there, but they will always, in the end, turn it in some kind of way as leverage over and against the great Satan. There's just no way around that. And Trump said, that world ends. We're not dealing with that world anymore. We're taking it apart. So how's he doing in that area? Well, by every traditional military metric, Iran is now effectively inert. Its navy's been destroyed. Its air force is gone. It has no missile defenses capable of stopping allied aircraft from operating freely over Iranian airspace. Missiles and drones, which were the backbone of Iran's asymmetric deterrence for 4 decades, they've been decimated to roughly 10% of pre-war stockpiles. $500 billion in weapons, infrastructure, military assets built painstakingly over 47 years have been entirely erased. That's the key. Not degraded, erased. In civcosm terms, this is the collapse of Iran's techno-political pillar, okay? The IRGC spent 4 decades building what was, for a regional power, a genuinely sophisticated asymmetric military technological ecosystem. Long-range missiles, armed drones, proxy networks across 5 countries, a nuclear program. It was Iran's answer to Western and Israeli technological superiority. The problem is their entire military architecture was 3rd generational. It's 3rd generational technology, land, sea, and air. What they just faced is civcosm 5th generational technology, land, sea, and air, plus cyberspace and even outer space. Remember, the very first move that was made in this war were through U.S. satellites that jammed all of Iran's communicative capabilities. Their 3rd generational military structure, architecture, gone.